what we're going to do is Stacy and I are going to talk for maybe 20, 25 minutes, and then we're going to throw it open to questions from the floor. As Debbie mentioned, the governor spoke this morning, and we haven't seen the details of his budget. I'm glad this is not a group of people from higher education. They would be perhaps jumping out of the windows. But we don't know sort of what it means for nonprofits generally and for the causes that you care about. But the assumption is that it's not going to be great news, and it's probably going to be bad news. We don't know how bad. And Stacy, I'm guessing that's less government money for nonprofits and the causes the donors care about is a pretty much a national trend.
Absolutely, and it's really at all levels of government that we see this happening. Very important at the state level, but government in federal level is very squeezed. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is that what kept a lot of nonprofits alive during the past couple of years was the money that came as the government was trying to stimulate the economy, and all of those stimulus funds were coming in. Well, they're all going to disappear now. So in addition to the regular cuts that we're going to see to get the deficit down, some of the money that had really been keeping things afloat is going away. And in a lot of ways, people thought the worst was over. I think the worst is still to come. And that's the part that is particularly alarming as we go into the next couple of years, and I think certainly why philanthropy is going to be on call. And I know it's a hard message because everybody really wants to go back to the days when it was a bit easier, but I don't think those days are coming anytime soon for anybody in the philanthropic world.
I think I was pleased to see that the governor did not say that he was creating a vacuum for the nonprofits to step in and fill. A lot of people seem to have that idea, when in fact, government obviously is a huge part of the nonprofit, funding the nonprofit organization.
Absolutely. I think people don't always understand, and in this room people get it, that really government is 60% of the money that goes to nonprofits. And it depends how you count, colleges and hospitals and that kind of thing. But government is absolutely the driver of the direct money that nonprofits get. And obviously there's the indirect, what is it that philanthropy is asked to bear as a result of all of these cuts and changes? And navigating that is what, regardless of whether you think you have anything to do with the government or not, it is going to affect really pretty much, I can't think of a philanthropic cause that isn't affected by what's going on in government. And I think it's going to be incredibly important to keep explaining how small philanthropy is compared to government. We had the president of the Gates Foundation came to visit the other day, and when he talks about numbers, I always have to do a double take because it's like incredible numbers compared to any other philanthropy. They're hugely rich. And they calculated, I think, that they can just pay with their endowment for a couple days of California's school system to operate. I mean, the scale of that is incredible. There's the biggest foundation in the country, perhaps in the world, and they can't even keep California schools open for a long time. So they, oops. Apologies for that. The idea that government would be, can count on philanthropy to replace things is really crazy. And so what we're going to have to talk about is the creative ways in which philanthropy can help by giving good ideas and also the leverage that you can all provide. And I think that's probably what you're all talking about.
As you know, as I'm sure you're all readers of the Chronicle, you know that one of the things they do is annual surveys of various kinds. And in the current issue, and there's some copies of it outside, it is the Foundation Survey, which is obviously of great interest to this group. Give us a sense of what you found this year in the Foundation Survey.
First of all, if any of you filled it out, thank you very much, because it's really hard to get people to give us numbers, and I know how frustrating it can be. But what we found is that things are definitely a little bit better. Assets have not recovered all the way to the point of where they were before the recession, but they're getting a whole lot closer. And a lot of foundations saw their portfolios do really well. We saw a lot of real differences. Some would be up 30% while others, saw a real drop. So it really depends on how you're invested. But foundations are certainly getting back to where they were. Giving is all over the map. I think some people are optimistic and think that they're going to be giving more. Some people are going to be giving less, but by far most people are just going to be able to give the same amount they were. Certainly with the 3-year rolling average, more people are looking ahead to the years when it will get a little bit better, and this year is not one of them. I don't think anybody is talking about really big grants, but people are starting to come back to talk about the idea of the multi-year grant, which had disappeared in a lot of places. People just weren't ready to look forward that way. And we saw some foundations saying, it's time to start thinking about that again. And a few foundations were starting to talk about new efforts. We did not hear a lot of that. We did not hear people say, it's time to start new programs, because really just holding on to what it is you're doing already is still pretty much a struggle.
When we talked the other day, we had one of the interesting things I think that you said, and I wanted to talk about it here, is sort of the question of okay, the nonprofit world has gone through a very tough couple of years. We certainly know that. And the question is whether that experience is closer to being an aberration or being the new normal. What's your perspective on it?
I think we are in a new environment, but I see in the philanthropic world two views. Some people who think that it is going to go back to the way it was, and really are just sort of waiting and continuing to do things pretty much the same. And then many others that say, we just got to do everything really differently and think about how we lead, how we run things. It's not just about how we spend money, but it's really about how we operate. Lots of creativity. And one of the things that has made it more interesting for me, certainly to cover this field during this really tough time, and it's painful sometimes, the stories we have to run about organizations that are wonderful, that are falling apart. But on the flip side, I see more creativity, more new ideas, and people really at this point saying, we just got to smash a lot of the rules and think about things very differently. And we see that in government as well. Some of you may have seen, one of the new ideas is these social finance bonds, which is an idea where foundations or other investors will front the money for a new idea, but if it gets results and if it meets certain objectives, government's going to pay for it. Now, it's a twist on the model that we always used to expect that philanthropy would innovate and government would end up paying, but now it's focused on the idea that maybe a private investor might think about this and think about investments in a new way and recognize that finally there seems to be some recognition in the government that it's time to start thinking about solving some of these problems before they cost too much. And so I feel like you start hearing that conversation in a way that is really helpful instead of the way you used to hear it before. So I do see some changes that actually are on the positive side.
One of the stories that's in the current issue about the foundation survey, and I know this is an audience of donors, but I think they'd be interested in what donors are saying about what grantees need to do differently, to succeed in this period where obviously the resources are not as robust as they were in the past, and where it may be a little harder to get a grant.
One of the things that many of the people we interviewed said was that, it's important to focus, first of all, on the things that matter. Things like creating jobs, the kinds of things that are actually going to stimulate the economy and help us get over some of these difficult things. So more foundations are really looking for ideas that are focused along those lines. But also to look at results. And as you all know, the sort of measurement mania has been going on for quite a while, and nobody has really figured out how to really get results, but a lot of interesting efforts are going on to try to figure that out. So certainly most foundations really are putting more emphasis on what works and why, and making sure that everyone proves that that kind of thing is going on. And the best advice in a way was just be honest with the foundation. Tell us what's really going on. And I think one of the things that studies that have been done recently by groups like the Center for Effective Philanthropy, where they highlighted what the best program officers do. And one of the things that they said was, they just ask open-ended questions and listen. And it's such an obvious thing, but that is part of what all of our jobs are in this field, is to really hear what's going on, to listen to the best ideas, and to be open to them. And it's your role in a lot of ways to help the recipients be honest and feel like they can tell you when things are not working well, so that then you can solve it and deal with it together. because it's really pretty challenging for nonprofits to admit to a donor that things aren't going completely as planned.
The next time I'm asked to justify, internally to justify how I'm doing, I want to say that you're just being guilty of measurement meaning. I don't think that'll be received too well. One of the other things I think they talked about was collaboration.
Collaboration is absolutely what we hear from everybody, and that means a lot of different things. Some of the studies that have been done of why nonprofits remarkably have been able to do some pretty incredible things as demands upon them for services really rise, and their budgets have not. They've managed to serve many, many more people, and there's some really wonderful stories of great work being done. Well, a lot of it is because people have finally been forced to come together and share some of their services, and some of those turf battles that have been so long in the nonprofit world are finally over, and groups are seriously talking about collaboration in a very good way. In Arizona, there's a community foundation that will now only give grants to collaborations. And they said you have to be focused on solving community. Because it's a community foundation, community funds, community problems are what we're going to focus on. But we will not give money unless you come to us as part of a coalition. And all of a sudden, it helped people start talking to each other because the money was only there that way. And it has really gotten a lot of the problems that nobody was dealing with, those things that are in the gaps. Especially dealing with older people and dealing with the aging situation there. That was a problem where each agency had its own little thing, but nobody really looked out for the whole person. And now they're looking out and doing those kinds of things. So we see a big change. A piece that I have not published yet, so you get a sneak peek at it, but I will publish very soon, is from the Meyer Foundation in Washington, which collaborated with another local foundation. And it actually, it decided that it was asking its grantees to collaborate. It was time for it to collaborate too. And one of the things that it did was it just basically asked the other foundation, which had a specialty in mental health, to be able to provide all the grants, basically serve as the program officer, and sort of hire out the services of their program officers at the Meyer Foundation. And it was something that they really wanted to reduce their own spending and administrative costs. Their endowment had tanked, and they needed to find a way to really put more money into grants. And their program officer was retiring, who specialized in this area. And so one of the things they realized is, why are we going to hire another person to give away this money when there's somebody else who has more expertise in doing it? Now, that's an unusual way to give up power, and it wasn't easy, and clearly there were things that were challenging on both sides of this, but that idea of everybody looking and saying, what do we do best, and what do we not have to do anymore, is pretty powerful. Certainly a difficult conversation. Collaboration is somewhat easier to talk about. Mergers is a tougher conversation. And we're starting to see certainly more of that, but I don't think nearly as much, and I don't know how much you have here, as much as everybody expected when the recession started, and people said, oh, there's just going to be mergers left and right. It really hasn't happened. And as you probably read about a very high-profile merger that fell apart over the last few days, Operation Smile and Smile Train, where they had these big ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, other places, saying, we've merged, we finally come together, and they're really big charities. And then the board said, we didn't really think this through. This was placed upon us. This was not a good idea. Whoops, sorry. And they just demerged yesterday after just 3 weeks of this merger. So mergers are tough. And I think that's going to be an issue that's going to need to be discussed a lot more.
In the last few years, at all levels of sort of the chain of money, both the grantors and the grantees, has there been a lot of attrition at any level, or did most groups seem to survive it?
One of the things that's challenging about covering nonprofits is that we never really know. And questions like that seem really obvious, like you should know how many nonprofits disappeared, is really kind of a challenge, both because of the way the IRS keeps some of this information and because of the data gathering in the field. People who are experts say that a lot of nonprofits have disappeared, merged, gone away. They're very tiny, they're so tiny that we can't necessarily keep track of them. And Paul Light, who many of you may know, is a scholar in this field, says that, one of the things he's really worried about is what he calls service deserts, where there are just regions of the country where there were never very strong nonprofits. Now those nonprofits have collapsed. There's really no place for a donor, even if you were interested necessarily in helping this particular part of the country, to really go and work with a nonprofit. You'd have to create the nonprofit and the program all by yourself to make that happen. But nobody has really charted that, and one of the things I certainly hope we could do at the Chronicle is try to figure that question out, because I don't think anybody really knows. I think in a lot of ways, more nonprofits exist maybe than people expected. But at one point, early in the recession, Paul Light said 100,000 groups are going to fall down, basically, and he still sticks to that. He said it didn't happen as fast as he thought it was, in part because of things like the federal stimulus, but when he looks out on the universe, he thinks that many groups could disappear. There are plenty of people, and when we get to question and answer, I'm sure you'll have views on this, and I will go out and talk to various people, and I'll ask how the nonprofits are doing, and people will say, yes, some groups are indeed falling apart, but almost everybody says it's groups that weren't doing very well to begin with, and we're almost glad about some of these groups. It's very interesting to me how, at least in a certain part of the country, there were feeling that some of these groups it was just too easy to raise money and to get a grant to be able to start a new effort, and that some of them did rightly disappear. I'm more worried about the places where nobody's even paying attention, and there are not services for people who need them, and we're not even having the right conversations, because I think that's the worst.
Yeah, I would guess that'd be very hard to track. I mean,
yeah.
Probably a lot of groups just sort of go dormant too. I mean,
there aren't even really rules about what's supposed to happen when you go under. And one of the things that state attorney generals are trying to encourage boards is to say, you are supposed to actually dissolve if you dissolve. There's something that has to happen with your assets. There are some formal things that happen here, but nobody's doing that.
So what are people in philanthropy going to be talking about 6 months from now or a year from now? I mean, what's sort of the next big thing?
It's the economy, stupid. I think, I wish we could say we're going to talk about other things, but it's all going to be organized around that, because with the kinds of changes that this economy is going through, clearly it's going to be many years, I think, until things have come back. And I mean, you look at all of the things that government has to do, business has to do, and the whole entire world. The more interesting things to talk about are things like how technology is transforming what people are able to do, how demographics are changing things or not changing things maybe as much as they should, and certainly other kinds of issues like that. So I hope we can put the focus on that and on innovation and some other kinds of things, but I know it's all going to be rooted really in money at various levels. One of the things that's interesting to see too is how much new money will actually flow into the world of philanthropy. Certainly one of the most interesting stories of the past year was the Giving Pledge with Warren Buffett and Bill and Melinda Gates going out and getting all of their friends to say, come have dinner with us and we're hitting you up to give at least half your fortune away, thank you very much. I don't know how many people actually want to go have dinner with them anymore, knowing that that's going to be the subject of the conversation. But it's certainly got lots of people at other levels of wealth thinking about what they can do with their money. I think certainly one of the most powerful things that happened when Warren Buffett said that he was going to give his money to the Gates Foundation was that it made people start thinking, I don't have to do this all myself. I could actually give my money to somebody else and think about a different way of giving. I think getting them out there and talking about what it is that you can accomplish with your money is a really important conversation that's going on. We have not seen it result in very much of anything yet. As a matter of fact, one of the calls I need to return when I leave here is tomorrow the Forbes Rich list is coming out, and Bill Gates is down on the list because he's given some of his money away. But people also, in our list of the biggest donors of the year, there were only 17 of the Forbes 400 wealthiest people who actually made our list of the Philanthropy 50. So that means, in a wonderful way, there are all these people who aren't white, mega rich, but just plain rich, who are among the country's top donors. But there are a lot of people who are in that really mega rich category who either are giving very quietly or are planning to give years from now or whatever, but they don't seem to be showing up in any way to be giving now. And certainly trying to change the conversation so that more people start thinking about what they can accomplish now. I think one of the things people expected to happen during the recession was that there would be more people when you have spend down foundations or start, if your foundation had lost a good chunk of its portfolio, that maybe it was time to think about giving it away quickly. And some foundations did, but I don't think we've seen nearly as much of that as we expected. So some of those conversations I hope we'll start seeing being part of the discussion.
So when you put out that list of individual donors,
yes.
do any individual donors call up and say, "You got it wrong, I gave more, I gave less," or?
They really, it's fascinating. While some really want to be on the list, most people don't want to be on that list.
I think it's a double edged.
We all know that, because people are afraid, and we always worry that our list is probably not nearly as complete as it should be, because people don't want to be hit up for money from other folks, and so they don't always want it to be known that they're giving money away. Or they're afraid that the amounts won't look like as much as maybe they think they should. I had a very funny conversation with the Soros Foundation when I called them to say, so we hadn't gotten their numbers, and I said, I know George Soros is giving a lot of money. He always gives a lot of money. He's always on the list every year. Or what's going on? And they said, well, we're afraid maybe he didn't give enough this year. Well, he was number one on the list. So I think people have a different feeling about their own capacity and what's really given. And when you think about a sophisticated philanthropist like that, not really knowing. And I think delightful that he doesn't care whether he's giving more. I mean, that's not why he does what he does. But people don't even have a framework of, sort of what is big giving or little giving or any of those kinds of things. We feel it's important to call attention to the idea that giving is important so that there is, and this was really Ted Turner's idea, that there is something other than the accumulators list, which the Forbes 400 is, but something that honors the people who are actually trying to give away. So that's why we like to chart that kind of thing. But not everybody wants to be part of it.
I'm going to open this up in a minute. I just want to ask Stacy a couple questions about her work. You've been involved in every issue of the Chronicle that has ever been printed over a long period of time. I'm just interested in, as somebody who used to be a conventional journalist, and I don't know what I am now, but how publishing the Chronicle has changed over time with all the obvious changes that there have been.
It's changed really dramatically. I was telling Larry when I came in, one of the things that was amazing, when we first started the Chronicle, we consulted a number of philanthropy experts, and one of them said, I can't imagine how you're going to fill those pages every 2 weeks. There are no stories. What do you think you're going to do? And he was a really respected person in the philanthropy field, and I was a very young person at that point, and I thought, goodness, what have I gotten myself into? I'm pretty sure we had a big story list. It looked like this fascinating world. I kind of think that we're going to be easily able to fill the paper. And that was, really not big on our list of worries. We had other worries like how are we going to get people to answer our calls to establish the idea that we were a legitimate newspaper. And that was the challenge at first, was to be able, the world of philanthropy has changed so dramatically in terms of being at least accessible to the outside world. When we started, which was in 1988, while philanthropy was starting to become more of a profession, in that nonprofits were starting to see themselves really more as part of a whole. That's what led to our newspaper being created, was people wanted to communicate with each other. And in those quaint days before the internet, this newspaper was the only way for them to necessarily know what was going on in the world that affected them during our. So if Congress was going to do something to affect the charitable deduction, the way you found out about it was through a newspaper. So there was great demand for us to be able to create this, but not necessarily a feeling that people wanted to talk openly about the kinds of things that go on in the world of philanthropy. And so when we did things like our salary surveys and things like that, which still probably aren't very popular for the people who appear on them, we used to get a great deal of people saying, oh goodness, I can't possibly, that's all private information. We won't talk about those things. And so the biggest change for me is that in this era of more transparency, people are used to the idea that yes, we will talk about this a little bit more. So our jobs have gotten somewhat easier in the fact that at least people are open to having a conversation and don't quickly hang up the phone as soon as the Chronicle of Philanthropy calls or any reporter calls. But the amount of information and the amount of information that you all get every day is just so huge that for us, our challenge now is to say, how do we cull it and make sure that you get what you need? And I really appreciated that Deborah said that the highlight of her day is getting philanthropy today. We take that really seriously. But our job is to go through and spoiled brats that we are, we get to read the newspaper as part of our job and read all these wonderful stories and come up with something that says, here's what's going on. And we hope that that helps you do your job better. We need to find other ways to be able to get the information to you, and we certainly, it's a question as to how much longer there'll be a print paper and how soon you'll be reading it all on your iPad. I hope that will be soon. I don't know. Lots of people still really like getting the physical copy. We like producing it, so we'll do it as long as people want to have it. But the fact that we can be on 24/7, and I don't have to wait. In the old days, I really had to wait sometimes for 2 weeks to be able to tell readers what was going on. That was painful. And now if something happens and we're able to get it out to our readers right away, that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. It does mean, however, that we're going to mess up. And I think the real challenge for us is to be accountable. For all journalists, it's going to be to make sure that we really do a good job. And it's unfortunately gotten really easy in this rush to get news out. To not do the right thing. So, that I think what's on my mind often as an editor is to make sure that we balance that. Because we are the interpreters to a lot of the general press about what's going on in this field. And when we mess up, that usually means it has an echo effect and it's messed up going down the line. So I take that responsibility really seriously.
So have you talked about going online only?
Yes, we have talked about that. If all of my reporters were here, and what they're probably talking about while I'm here, they're there, is they're ready. They'd like us to just do away with print entirely. But I see that, our readers still have great demand for print. So, I don't think we're there yet. I just don't know how long. And it's the same thing for every newspaper. It is trying to decide how you serve people best. And what I love about online delivery is, I hope to get to the point where it's really easy for you to say, I care about the arts, I care about social services, I care about those things around the world, and I care about them in Philadelphia, and I'll quickly get you the information to you. And so the more we can do that so that it's tailored to you, and then we give you some other things to broaden your worldview, because you might not know everything you want to know. We'll tell you some other stuff, then we'll have helped you, I hope, to do your job. So that's what we look at. How we deliver it, not sure it matters quite so much as the fact that we stay on top of it. And one of the things that I think has been so interesting to look at in lots of cities around the country is where foundations are playing such an important role in providing money for news operations. In the newspaper world, everybody is nonprofit right now. And so, it's really changed the way people think about things. And I think that's where a lot of the exciting developments are, certainly, is to see these new nonprofit institutions rising up to cover various local areas, or to do investigative reporting like Chronicle does.
But you're quite right. It doesn't matter how it's delivered as long as someone pays for it.
Yes. I'm afraid we still do need that.
Okay, I think now's the time. We'd like some questions from the floor. I know we have 10 or 15 minutes anyway. Right over there.
Hi, I'm curious what you think the future of program-related investments tied to low-profit limited liability companies, or L3Cs. If you have an opinion or...
The interesting thing about program-related investments to me has been how it's been talked about for such a long time and has still not taken off in the way that one might have expected it would have. Not to use the Gates example again, but because they have so much money, they tend to dwarf things. When they announced that they were going to do program-related investments, they said they were going to put $400 million into it. And they did this about a year and a half ago. That's more than anybody together spends on program-related investments, and they just came in and did it, and they didn't even look at it as a really major initiative. I mean, that's how small it is. And so I think one of the things we're seeing is certainly more interest in talk about mission investing and other kinds of things, and certainly helping nonprofits get loans and other kinds of things that they need just to survive, just to deal with cash flow. Getting into the limited liability companies, one of the things that, a number of states, do you have them here? Pennsylvania hasn't adopted them yet, I don't think. There are only a handful of states that have adopted them. Most of them are pretty small states. And we did a story to say, because we thought this was the hot thing that everybody was going to be doing, and we could only find a handful of examples, and certainly not much where philanthropy was able to get involved in various ways. There seem to be both objections and hurdles and other kinds of things. So I think everybody's excited about the idea, but it doesn't seem to be taking off nearly as fast as everyone expected. Is that your experience too?
Other questions?
You mentioned earlier that the publication is international. Are other countries copying our system? I understand one of the growth areas of philanthropy is what's happening elsewhere in the world.
Absolutely. One of the things that's so interesting is how much philanthropy is growing in various parts of the world. And we aren't able to cover that nearly as much as we occasionally can do that. But a lot of ideas from other places are now coming here, which is fun to see. Those social finance bonds that I talked about were really pioneered in England, and now they're coming here. And so instead of sort of, with philanthropy, it always used to be the American model is what everybody came to look at. And there's still a lot of that in terms of fundraising. American fundraisers are known as being among the best at being able to raise money. So lots of people come here to learn how to do that, and lots of fundraisers are being recruited abroad to do that. But certainly every government is grappling with this issue of how much can government still do, and that is raising the conversation about private sector kinds of things. So I see lots going on that's really exciting, and certainly the interest of philanthropists of this generation, very interested in global issues, and in part because the money goes a lot further. You can do a lot abroad, and people are very excited about that. One of the people we quoted in the Philanthropy 50, the list of the biggest donors, was a guy who was a 44-year-old hedge fund guy. And he said, I can't imagine giving to Harvard. Who would give to Harvard anymore? We give abroad where our money can make a difference and to do things. We don't want to do things the old style way. So I think you're starting to see that divide happen in various ways. And I will tell you, I get lots of visits from people from various countries wanting to know more about philanthropy. And in one case, some Brazilian delegates came to say, could they start a news service about the philanthropic world in Brazil, which I was pretty excited to see that happen. So they wanted really specific advice about how we do what we do, and wanted to develop a news service. So there's a lot going on in various places.
Is there a publication like yours anywhere else that you know?
Not exactly. There are services, like in England, there's something Third Sector Online that covers a lot of the same kinds of things we do. So, there are certainly efforts. There's nothing quite as comprehensive as what we do. But I think there will be at some point.
Yes.
Do you think there's any American money in any of the democracy domino that's happening in the East?
One of the people I visited with yesterday actually is a philanthropist who is working in the Middle East very specifically to help young people get jobs. And one of the things that he does through his foundation is only train people for positions where there actually are jobs, because if you're a college graduate, I think he was talking about in Egypt, but I may have gotten the country wrong, so I apologize if this fact isn't right, but I think the concept is true, is that 22% of college graduates are unemployed. So it's a disincentive to go to college. You do better if you don't go to college. You're more likely to get a job just because of the way the employment situation works. So trying to change that dynamic is a really interesting kind of thing. And one of the things, why did he want to talk to me? In part because he hasn't been able to get philanthropy's attention to this kind of topic. And he said, everybody knows right now that jobs is a really key issue because we've been reading about what's going on in the Middle East now and what are some of the causes of it. Now people are paying attention, but they weren't paying enough attention earlier to sort of deal with some of the key issues. So now the question is, sort of what will happen, and also what role government funds play. So certainly the State Department, USAID, some of those folks are interested as well. But it's a really important issue for philanthropy to think about what it can do, especially as civil society is really, in a lot of ways, causing some of this tumult, and people are very excited about their power. It would be a great thing to be able to muster it in some of the right ways.
I would guess that comment raises a question, but that groups are constantly pitching you stories about themselves. Because I can't think of a better fundraising tool than a story about the great work I'm doing up here in the Chronicle.
That's one of our real challenges, because all a lot of the groups we cover are doing really wonderful things, and so we can't possibly cover it all as much as we would like to. And it does get to sort of the question of what's newsy about what people are doing, what's innovative, what's different. And so sadly, I often have to turn people down, even though they are doing really wonderful things, but they haven't necessarily come up with some completely different way of thinking about dealing with homelessness that really works, or something like that would be one of the filters I might use to decide whether it's worth a news story. I'm happy to, and certainly if you want to talk to me later about any story ideas, to talk about what works and what doesn't. There's no perfect science for this. There's no, I have a small staff, comparatively speaking, and we just can't get to everything. So sometimes there are terrific ideas that we're just not able to get to, surely because of size.
Yeah, back there.
As government funding dries up at an alarming rate, what do you think the appropriate role of the philanthropic community is to play in advocating for the causes and the areas that we care about with the public sector?
There probably isn't one right answer to that question about what the appropriate role to play is, but certainly among our readers, I will tell you that the call for more advocacy and more support for advocacy is something that I hear frequently, and a better understanding of what the legal limits are. I think foundations, and you probably face this often, are so worried about the law that you scoot all the way over here when really there are lots of things that you all can do, and some of it you probably do, that really you are allowed to get into the public debate in various ways. Pew is a wonderful example of some of the things that you can do in various innovative ways. There was a time I went to Capitol Hill to go cover something, and I went into the subway when I was done with my event, and the entire subway, everything, the kiosk where you buy your tickets, there was no place you couldn't go that wasn't a message from Pew. I think it was about saving, it was probably saving the oceans or saving, it was something like, it was one of those kinds of causes that I can't, and obviously the message did stick that it was Pew and not what the cause was, because I was so intrigued by it. But it was unbelievable, it was right on Capitol Hill, and you couldn't not have noticed it. It was brilliant, to me, that, there it was, where all lawmakers and staff members are getting on the train and thinking about it, and you had to think about that issue, and you were directed to your else to go find more information out and do those kinds of things. So there are lots of things, certainly, that philanthropy can do to call attention to various causes without in any way crossing the legal lines, but they don't. And I think the other responsibility that foundations and all of the nonprofit has is to try to change the tone in Washington. And it's hard, and nobody has the solution, but you of all people have the ability to really cross many divides and talk for people who just really need help in various ways. And some things, I think the thing that's most difficult for people who have dealt with politics for a long time is the fact that it's just so hard to even get people to talk to each other. And if philanthropy can play a role in bringing sides together so that there aren't some of these really awful conversations, but really good conversations on the issues, that would be a really wonderful, wonderful role of philanthropy that you can play, and you can play completely legally.
There's a small responsibility for the philanthropic to change the tone of the measure.
Yeah, no big deal. Just continue.